Chamber, we are absolutely delighted to be hosting Governor Macklem, and we're going to discuss the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, its impact on the Canadian labour market, and the implications for Alberta's business community. I'm now going to turn the podium over to my co-host, Murray Sigler, the interim CEO of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you so much, Janet, and thank you everyone for joining us today. In the spirit of respect, collaboration, and truth, I would like to honor and acknowledge that today's event takes place on the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta and the Treaty 6 region in central Alberta. Calgary and Edmonton are also home to Métis Nations of Alberta, regions 1 and 3. Governor Macklem is joining us virtually from Ottawa, Ontario, which we'd like to respectfully acknowledge is built on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Land acknowledgement is an important part of Canada's truth and reconciliation journey. Before we begin, I would also like to sincerely thank our sponsors for today's event. On behalf of myself and Janet, thank you to our presenting sponsor, CPA Alberta. Thank you to our supporting sponsors, Alberta Blue Cross, Dynalife Medical Labs, and TD. And now, I'd like to turn the virtual stage over to a message from Rachel Miller, CEO of CPA Alberta, and our presenting sponsor today.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to bring greetings today on behalf of more than 30,000 chartered professional accountants across Alberta. Like those of you tuning in today, Alberta CPAs fill a number of important roles in this province. They're business leaders, consultants, finance experts, trusted advisors, entrepreneurs, and more. As cornerstones in their organization, Alberta CPAs know the value of community, learning from one another, and collaboration. To this end, CPA Alberta is proud to sponsor today's conversation with Tiff Macklem, Governor of the Banque du Canada. Thank you to the Edmonton and the Calgary Chambers of Commerce for continuing to support and bring together two of Alberta's largest business communities. As the pandemic continues to cause uncertainty and make it difficult to gather in person, opportunities to virtually come together like this are even more important. Also important are the contributions of Alberta business to communities around the province. CPA Alberta commends Alberta businesses for continuing to do what they do best, pushing forward despite any challenges to contribute to a stronger Alberta. The resiliency shown by all of you over the past 11 months is an excellent example of the strong and unbreakable spirit our province is known for. Of course, these are uncertain times, and in order to plan for the future, it's imperative that we understand the landscape that we live and work in. This landscape includes the political and economic forces both within Alberta and within Canada as a whole. As we are all acutely aware, these landscapes are rapidly changing for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the ongoing pandemic and the volatile energy prices. As the nation's central bank, the Bank of Canada is dedicated to promoting the economic and financial welfare of the country. I'm certain that Mr. Macklem's insights today will be essential to not only understand the factors that affect business in Alberta, but perhaps how to prepare and adapt for what's still to come. As the province slowly reopens and recovers, this understanding will be especially important. I have no doubt that Alberta's businesses are up to this challenge, and as always, Alberta CPAs will be here to support them with the right financial and strategic insights to guide them through these uncertain times. Thank you again to the Edmonton and Calgary Chambers of Commerce for hosting this conversation, and thank you for the opportunity to help bring such an important topic to Alberta's business community.
Rachel, our sincere thanks to you and to CPA Alberta for your generous support. It's now my pleasure to more formally introduce our guest speaker. Governor Tiff Macklem first joined the Bank of Canada in 1984. He returned in 1989 following the completion of his PhD in economics. Mr. Macklem occupied increasingly senior positions and was appointed Deputy Governor in 2004. During the global economic financial crisis, Mr. Macklem was Associate Deputy Minister at the Federal Department of Finance and served as Canada's representative at the G7, G20, and the Financial Stability Board. Mr. Macklem also formerly served as the Dean at the Rotman School of Business of Management at the University of Toronto. Governor Macklem has kindly offered to take questions following his presentation. So for those of you that are joining us on WebEx, please feel free to submit your questions at any time during his presentation using the box at the right of the screen. Governor, thank you so much for being here today. The podium is yours.
Well, thank you, Janet, for that very kind introduction. And Murray, thank you for the land acknowledgement, and Rachel for setting up my remarks. I am very pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you today, and I want to thank you for the invitation. As much as we're all now used to these virtual events, I have to say I would much prefer to be with you in person to hear your perspectives and concerns directly. Your input is important to the Bank of Canada. We need to know what's happening on the ground in Alberta and across the country. Fortunately, the Bank of Canada has a strong presence in your province. 2 years ago, we opened our Financial Operations Centre in downtown Calgary, and today it employs almost 90 people. And since 1997, we've had staff in our regional offices, and they are eager to listen to business leaders like you. Over the past year, their job has been more critical than ever. So if you haven't met Alex Fritchie, who heads up our Calgary office, I'd encourage you to get to know him. I know he would love to hear from you. COVID-19 has touched every Canadian in every corner of the country. The pandemic is, first and foremost, a human tragedy. It's taken the lives of over 20,000 Canadians, and it's not over. It's also led to an economic downturn unlike anything we've ever seen. Albertans have been especially hard hit, facing the double blow of lockdowns and low oil prices. We've already climbed a long way back from the very deep economic hole we were in last spring. And with Alberta and much of the rest of Canada emerging from the latest round of containment measures, we expect a solid rebound in the immediate months ahead. How much the economy can reopen and the strength of this rebound will depend on the path of the virus, including new variants. But with vaccinations expected to ramp up, we can be more confident in sustained strong growth through the second half of this year and into next year. Nevertheless, it will take some time before we see a complete economic recovery. The bank's latest forecast doesn't anticipate economic slack being fully absorbed until into 2023. COVID has pummeled the service sectors that have been most affected. Moreover, we're not returning to the same economy we had before the pandemic. Even as it recovers, the economy is adapting to structural changes, and some workers will need to shift to jobs in faster growing sectors of the economy. This all points to an even more protracted recuperation period, while the economic potential that was lost over the course of the pandemic is rebuilt. Today, I want to look at the economic recovery through the lens of the labor market. For Canadians and their families, few things are more important than a good job. A healthy labor market means more employment and higher incomes. It also means greater opportunities for people who have struggled to find work. For the Bank of Canada, a healthy labor market is central to achieving our mandated goal of low, stable, and predictable inflation. Indeed, at its heart, inflation targeting is about achieving low inflation together with full employment, because to sustainably achieve either, we need both. Without full employment, inflation will not stay close to its 2% target because the shortfall in jobs and incomes will pull inflation down. And without low inflation and well-anchored inflation expectations, we're doomed to repeat the boom and bust cycles that result in large fluctuations in employment. Today, a healthy labor market remains a long way off. The economy is still down more than 850,000 jobs from before the pandemic, and these losses are concentrated among the most vulnerable, low-wage workers who are disproportionately women and youth. In my remarks, I'll discuss the prospects for a complete recovery in the labor market. I'll start by reviewing the deep and disparate impacts of the pandemic on Canadian workers so far. I'll then talk about what we can expect in the months ahead and how the pandemic has sped up the restructuring related to the forces of digitalization and automation. And I'll conclude with a few words about what these forces mean for everyone: workers, educators, businesses, and of course, policymakers. Together, we can manage these forces to the benefit of Canadians. A complete recovery is a shared recovery, shared by working women and men of all ages across Canada. Now, some ebb and flow in labor market conditions across regions is inevitable, but all regions need to share in the recovery. Historically, Alberta has attracted workers from other regions. Prosperity in the oil patch has created jobs and wealth that were spread across the country. Alberta remains a province with tremendous promise, blessed with an abundance of natural and human resources. Yours is among the most highly educated populations in Canada, with a great spirit of entrepreneurship. A healthy and diverse Alberta economy will be important as we work towards securing a complete recovery. At the start of 2020, Canada's labor market was in quite good shape. Of course, there were still pockets of weakness, particularly in energy-intensive regions. But overall, we had largely undone the damage caused by the global financial crisis. The unemployment rate had fallen to near 40-year lows. Participation rates were increasing for all age groups. Wage growth was rising, and the quality of jobs was improving. When COVID-19 arrived in Canada, this all changed very suddenly. In just 2 months, March and April, roughly 3 million jobs disappeared. From February to May, the unemployment rate went from one of the lowest on record to one of the highest. COVID-19 has affected everybody, but the impacts have been much more severe for those in economic sectors, for some economic sectors and the workers in those sectors. High contact service industries where physical distancing is either difficult or impossible have been hammered. Meanwhile, industries where physical distancing or remote work is possible, such as professional services, finance, and public administration, have been much better able to adapt. And of course, essential workers in healthcare and public safety are working harder than ever, and we're very grateful to them. These starkly different effects across sectors have led to very unequal consequences across workers. Because women and youth hold so many of the jobs in the hardest hit sectors, they've borne a disproportionate share of the job losses. For example, young people, those aged 15 to 24, hold about 40% of the jobs in accommodation and food services. That's more than 3 times their share of the labor force. Take a look at this chart. The bars on the left show that by April last year, youth employment had fallen by more than 30%. You can also see that job losses hit youth harder than prime age workers, those 25 to 54 years old. They're shown on the right. And across all ages, women, shown in red, have fared worse than men, shown in blue. For families with young children, the closing of schools and daycares has also had a profound impact on the ability of parents to work. The burden of childcare tends to fall disproportionately on women. From February to May, the participation rate of women in the labor force declined sharply. And for women who remained in the labor force, the jobless rate rose from about 5.5% to almost 14%. Now, as the economy reopened in the spring, the plunge in employment reversed sharply. From May through November, the economy added almost 2.4 million jobs, recovering about 80% of its losses. This rebound also began to narrow some of the inequalities in the labor market. Women returned to the labor force, recovering much of the earlier decline in participation. Youth employment also improved modestly, though as you can see in this chart, young women in particular, represented by the red line, continue to face very challenging labor market conditions. In recent months, the second wave of the virus has interrupted the jobs recovery. More than 250,000 jobs were lost in the past 2 months, with the pain again falling disproportionately on women and youth. Another sign of the pandemic's unequal impact is that job losses have been concentrated among those least able to afford them. Low-wage jobs have been severely affected by the pandemic. This chart makes this all too clear. The red line shows you that employment outside low-wage jobs fell modestly at the start of the pandemic and recovered relatively quickly. By September, it had exceeded its pre-pandemic level. These jobs have also proven more resilient to the second wave of the virus, remaining relatively steady in recent months. This reflects the ability of large parts of the economy to adapt to the pandemic. In contrast, employment in low-wage jobs, shown in blue, was hit very hard at the early stages of the pandemic. It never fully recovered, and it has drifted lower since the summer. Low-wage employment is now more than 25% below its pre-pandemic level. Finally, as the pandemic has dragged on, we've also seen a sharp rise in the number of long-term unemployed people. These are people who have been out of work and actively looking for a job for more than 26 weeks. More than 500,000 Canadians are now long-term unemployed. That's the highest in almost 30 years. This increase mostly reflects the people who lost their job early in the pandemic and have not returned to work yet. Once again, sectors such as accommodation and food services made an outside contribution. Well, that's a look back. Fortunately, the look forward is more encouraging, though there are challenges. With the tightest containment restrictions now being lifted in most parts of the country, we can expect to see some bounce back in employment in the near term. And as with the first reopening, we should see some reversal of the pandemic's very uneven impact in the labor market. The difference coming out of this second wave is that vaccines now promise a more sustained recovery. Once Canada achieves widespread vaccinations, high-contact service industries should be able to resume something approaching full operations. This means strong job growth. Further, it's reasonable to expect that more working mothers will rejoin the labor force as schools and daycares reopen permanently. It's going to be important to support this recovery and to facilitate this return to work, and that's a theme I'm going to return to. However, while we expect to get back to more normal activities, we're not going back to the same economy we had before. The fourth industrial revolution, the restructuring caused by digitalization and automation, was already well underway before the pandemic. And COVID has accelerated it. Like earlier technological advances, digitalization and automation will bring important economic benefits through higher productivity and eventually higher wage jobs. Companies will find ways to become more efficient and create new types of jobs using innovative technologies. We've seen this process play out repeatedly, driving progress here in Canada and around the world. But deploying new technologies can displace existing jobs. Adjusting to these changes is disruptive, particularly for the people directly involved. And the process is even more painful if it happens quickly. COVID has broadened and accelerated the incentives for business to restructure through automation and digitalization. Businesses are restructuring so they can deliver goods and services to their customers safely, so their employees can work remotely, and so they can build resilience and reduce costs. Let me highlight a few examples. We've seen a huge increase in e-commerce since the start of the pandemic at the expense of bricks and mortar stores. Now, we can expect some return to in-store shopping as it becomes safe to do so, but the pandemic has likely permanently advanced the trend towards e-commerce. This may make shopping more convenient, but it does point to the risk that the economy may need significantly fewer in-store retail workers than it did before the pandemic. COVID has also led to a massive increase in remote work. Statistics Canada reports that almost 5.5 million Canadians are now working remotely. That's more than a quarter of the labor force. Many employers and employees have also become a lot more flexible about work arrangements, and businesses everywhere are reconsidering the future of work. This will have implications for the amounts and types of space companies need and for the demand for transportation, food, and other services in our downtown cores. At the same time, these forces may make it easier for more people to work. I don't want to minimize the challenges that remote work can pose and the difficulties that is meant for some people, but many workers are delighted to save time and money by giving up a long daily commute. The possibility of remote work may also help some businesses and workers overcome the challenges posed by geography. For some jobs, remote work could improve matching between employers and employees, resulting in a stronger labor market and higher productivity. The trend towards digitalization suggests the demand for workers with digital skills will continue to rise. Take a look at this chart. Bank staff analyzed online job postings over the past year. They found that postings for jobs related to the digital economy, like IT and software development, which are shown in blue, declined by less and recovered by more than postings for other types of jobs shown in red. You can also see by this same measure, job postings for workers with digital skills are now well above pre-pandemic levels. At the same time, some of the jobs that have been lost in the pandemic are not going to return. And the workers who have already borne the brunt of the pandemic may be especially affected. Many low-wage jobs have high potential to be automated. And some jobs, like retail salespersons and cashiers, which are disproportionately held by women and youth, are also the kinds of jobs where the pandemic has accelerated structural change. As long as some groups are struggling, we won't secure a complete and shared economic recovery. The stakes are high for everyone. We've seen a sharp rise in long-term unemployment. And people who go for a long time without a job can become discouraged and stop looking for work altogether. Economists call this labor market scarring. Labor market scarring can set people's careers back by years, severely limiting their lifetime earnings. Scarring also reduces the potential output of the economy, eroding its ability to grow without creating unwanted inflationary pressures. As a result, uneven outcomes that hurt some people lead to poor outcomes for everyone. We all have a shared responsibility to get Canadians back to work, to manage the forces of digitalization and automation, and to reduce the risks of labor market scarring. For workers, being in a position to take advantage of the opportunities is crucial. Not all jobs in the most affected sectors will return when the pandemic is over. So it's worth it for everyone to think about where their interests lie and the skills and training needed to pursue them. Digital skills will likely be in high demand. Technology is no longer a sector, it's every sector. The Bank of Canada's latest Business Outlook survey indicates that companies are ramping up investments in digitalization. And as the recovery progresses, the need for people with digital skills is only likely to intensify. The shift towards remote work can also represent an important opportunity for worker. Technology and increased flexibility can make it possible for people to fill jobs that were previously out of reach because of time or distance. For example, a person in Medicine Hat might not even think about taking a great job in, say, Mississauga or Moncton. But in certain sectors, remote work can make it possible to take that job. New digital technologies are transforming the education system, and that's allowing learning to be delivered virtually. This could potentially broaden access to teaching and expand capacity, and this could be especially important in high-demand areas such as data science, engineering, software development, and business analytics. But the issue is far broader. Universities and colleges need to build in digital skills across all disciplines. Primary and secondary schools also need greater emphasis on digital literacy. This isn't about training children for particular jobs. This is about preparing children for a digital future, where giving them the skills, the digital skills they'll need to master in whatever career they choose. Companies also have a critical role to play in training. After all, as employers, you are best placed to know what skills you're looking for in your employees. New virtual formats mean businesses can train more workers at lower cost. Some businesses are supplementing formal training with reverse mentoring programs where younger, digitally savvy workers are paired with older, more experienced workers. And businesses can reduce scarring by seeing the potential in the person behind the resume, not the gaps in it. There are many young workers who entered the labor force during the pandemic who have struggled to find work through no fault of their own. Governments are playing a leading role in supporting workers. Emergency relief measures are replacing incomes for lost jobs, and wage subsidies are keeping businesses and workers connected. Strengthening the social safety net for families, particularly by increasing access to childcare and reducing its cost, will help more women return to the labor force and stay there. As the labor market rebounds and restructures at the same time, reducing the risks of scarring points to the importance of active labor market policies, policies that improve matching and give more people better access to good jobs. The Bank of Canada is supporting spending in the economy and helping facilitate investments in workers and other forms of capital by keeping borrowing costs low. With a complete recovery still a long way off, monetary policy will need to provide stimulus for a considerable period. We've committed to keeping our policy rate at the effective lower bound until economic slack is absorbed so that our inflation target is sustainably achieved. And we've backed up this commitment with our program of large-scale government bond purchases. A complete recovery, a shared recovery, is in everyone's interest. A shared recovery is self-reinforcing. It draws more workers into the labor force. It leads to more investment. It generates more potential growth. And it creates space for the economy to expand without building inflationary pressures. I began this speech by highlighting the health of Canada's labor market before the pandemic. Unemployment had been around 40-year lows for a couple of years. Based on past economic cycles, we would have expected inflationary pressures to begin to rise. But inflation wasn't threatening to take off. And as the pandemic recedes and the recovery continues, we will keep that experience in mind. Monetary policy can continue to support demand in order to minimize scarring and bring as many people into the workforce as possible. It's time for me to conclude. And I hope you'll allow me, for the benefit of Francophone Canadians and those learning French across the country, to deliver a few of the key messages in French. La pandémie est à l'origine d'énormes pertes en vie humaine et en revenus, ici et à travers le monde. Elle a touché beaucoup plus les emplois qu'occupent les femmes et les jeunes dans les filières liées aux services à forte proximité physique. Une fois qu'une grande partie de la population aura été vaccinée, l'économie canadienne devrait rebondir et de nombreux emplois seront recréés. Mais nous n'aurons plus le même type d'économie qu'avant. Une partie des entreprises et des emplois auront disparu du fait des changements permanents de la demande ou de l'adoption de nouvelles technologies. Il faut donc s'attendre à un long processus d'ajustement et une reprise lente. La Banque du Canada jouera son rôle de soutien à l'économie pendant un certain temps. Toutefois, la politique monétaire seule ne suffira pas à produire une reprise complète. Nous avons tous un rôle à jouer en vue d'une reprise généralisée, durable et largement partagée. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a tremendous toll here and around the world in lives and livelihoods lost. And it has disproportionately affected high-contact service sectors where many women and youth work. As Canada achieves widespread vaccinations, we expect the economy to rebound, and many of these jobs will return. But we're not going back to the same economy we had before. Some businesses and some jobs will not return, either because of permanent changes in demand or the adoption of new technologies. So we can expect a long adjustment process and a protracted recovery. The economy will need support for quite some time, and the Bank of Canada will continue to do its part. But monetary policy alone can't bring about a complete recovery. We all have a role to play to ensure the recovery is broad-based, sustained, with benefits that are widely shared. This highlights the importance of targeted public policies, businesses that invest in workers, and an education system that develops skills needed for the 21st century. I look forward to working together to bring about this shared recovery. Thank you.
Governor Macklem, thank you so much for your thoughtful insights and your perspectives. This is something, there's a lot to unpack, isn't there? And I love your perspective that, I mean, the Bank of Canada certainly is a big player, a big partner in this, but we all have a role to play. And I can assure you, we here in Alberta will be front and center, stepping up to ensure that we play our role effectively and efficiently with impact. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to start the Q&A portion of our program. And a reminder that you can submit your questions at any time using the box on the right-hand side of your screens. Before we get started with questions, Murray and I are just going to begin with a couple of questions of our own. Governor, as you noted, the first few weeks of the pandemic rolled back the clock on 3 decades of advancements in women's labor force participation. You know, despite some rebound, women are remaining significantly, impacted, and this is holding back Canada's overall economic recovery. I'm interested in, whether you see any monetary policies or tools that the Bank of Canada could leverage to regain the ground that's been lost for Canadian women specifically.
Well, Janet, as you've underlined, yes, women have been particularly affected by this pandemic, and I showed a number of charts that really made that all too clear. As we came out of the first wave, we did see some narrowing of these inequalities, and particularly as Canadians get vaccinated, as we achieve widespread vaccinations, we are expecting to see a more sustained rebound in jobs. And through that period, we do expect that those most affected sectors, many of those hard-hit service sectors, will rebound, and those jobs that the women have lost, they will come back, and we will again see some narrowing of these inequalities. And it's going to be important for businesses and governments to lean into that. With respect to monetary policy, we can't. Monetary policy is it's a broad macro tool. It can't target specific sectors of the labor force. But what monetary policy can do is it can continue to support the economy through the full length of the recovery, to try to minimize the effects of scarring, get women and men back to work, bring them back into the labor force, and achieve a complete recovery. And I would just underline that that's obviously very important for the individuals involved, but it's good for everyone. If you draw more people into the labor force, that creates more space for the economy to grow, and that benefits everybody. There are some other policies that are going to be important, more targeted policies. Those aren't monetary policy, but I think certainly policies, for example, that improve the access to childcare or reduce its cost. Those will also be helpful in drawing women back into the labor force and making sure they can stay there.
Yeah, I will say, childcare has been a primary concern throughout all of our consultations here in Edmonton with all of our business and community leaders, and we've been gratified to see the Alberta government responding to our need to put in more in place for flexibility in order, as you say, that, people can get into the labor force and actually stay there. Thank you.
Governor, it's Murray. In your comments, you noted as restrictions are eased, the difference this time will be the vaccinations, giving us greater sustainable recovery prospect going forward. In recent weeks, though, we've seen some disruptions in the global vaccine supply, which have had an impact on Canada's vaccine rollout going back at least a couple of months. So the question, do you expect to see the global vaccination rollout to experience frequent setbacks in the months to come? And if so, would this change your outlook for Canada's economic recovery?
Murray, it is worth just taking a step back and reminding ourselves just how successful the global effort to develop new vaccines has been. It has been a tremendous global success that we already have very effective vaccines, and we're quite a bit farther ahead than we thought we would be even 6 months ago. With respect to the rollout of vaccines, look, clearly getting vaccines into Canada and into Canadians is top priority. That is critical to save lives, it's critical to save livelihoods, and the sooner we achieve widespread immunity and get back to more normal activities, the stronger and more sustained will be the recovery. The assumptions we've made in our own outlook about the pace of vaccinations are broadly in line with the government's plans. As we usually do, we've made some prudent assumptions. Given the scale of this undertaking, it's reasonable to expect there are going to be some bottlenecks, there are going to be some delays, and so we have allowed. We made reasonably prudent assumptions about the rollout of vaccines in our own forecasts. Our assumption is that Canada achieves widespread immunity by the end of this year, and with that, we're expecting, as vaccines roll out, we're expecting to see strong growth through the second half of this year and into the full first half of next year. There is still some uncertainty out there. We're in a much better place than we were 6 months ago, but news of new variants is certainly worrisome, and I think this just underlines the importance of moving ahead with the vaccination program.
Thank you, Governor.
Governor, thanks for that. We have a question from the audience I'd like to pose. The UK became the first country to make the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, mandatory by 2025. Mark Carney has been a strong advocate of countries adopting TCFD. Do you anticipate that Canada will follow suit and adopt TCFD?
Well, I am a fan of TCFD. It's not up to me to decide whether Canada makes it mandatory. But let me say this. I think it's in every company's best interest to disclose. The world is looking for information. We are seeing big shifts in global capital. One thing that's very different about this crisis compared to 08-09, in 08-09, climate change was kind of put aside. Interestingly, this time, the pandemic, I think, has only accelerated the recognition that we are facing a number of big global challenges, and climate change is perhaps the biggest. And we're actually seeing an acceleration of capital going into more environmentally conscious funds. What this does, this puts a premium on companies that are doing a good job of disclosing, that have a clear strategy to manage through the transition, that are disclosing their climate risks, have established targets. Those are going to be the companies that do the best job of attracting capital. Clearly, we're going to need Alberta's oil and gas through the transition to low carbon growth. And companies that embrace that transition and have a clear plan and disclose it are the ones that are going to do the best in the marketplace.
Thank you.
Governor, here's a question we've got in. What's the impact of the rapid and incredibly large growth in the national deficit and ultimately the national debt?
Well, this pandemic is unlike anything we have ever seen before. And as I highlighted, the impacts on the labor market have been profound. In the space of 2 months, more than 3 million Canadians lost their jobs. That required extraordinary emergency relief programs to replace incomes for those jobs lost. these programs have been very effective in putting a floor under the recovery, under the recession, and in really setting the stage for recovery. Even with still 850,000 jobs below where we were before the pandemic, incomes are holding up better than jobs because of these relief measures, and that means the economy is positioned as things reopen to rebound. So, these measures were necessary. The wage subsidies, I think, are a very good example of a smart kind of program, because they keep workers and firms connected, so that as the economy rebounds, companies they're still connected to those workers, they can call their workers back, and we're in a position to seize the opportunity to rebound. Now, these are emergency measures, and they're going, as the economy rebounds, it will be time to scale those back. With respect to our deficit, yes, it has risen dramatically with these measures. We are fortunate that we went into this crisis with relatively low debt-to-GDP ratio, the lowest in the G7, and we still have the lowest debt-to-GDP ratio in the G7 because other countries are doing similar things and moving out. It will, over time, be very important to reestablish a sustainable fiscal policy, and that's something that I think everybody will be watching for.
Thank you.
Governor, thanks again. We have another great question from the audience. During the pandemic, some occupations have been disrupted but are still very necessary. For example, society still requires construction occupations, yet many have left the industry because of project uncertainty and delays and reduced capital investment. We have unemployed construction workers and maintenance workers, and at the same time, a profound shortage of construction workers are forecasted. So how do we encourage tradespeople to maintain their connections to their own industries, and how do we support them and their families while we wait out for this economy to return?
Well, it's a very good question, and the answer is multifaceted. Part of it goes back to the previous question. These emergency support measures are there to help people get to the other side of this. But I think that the fundamental issue you're getting at is this sort of these search costs and mismatching. And here's where I think I mentioned this in my remarks: the importance of active labor market policies that can help match companies with workers, can help workers find better jobs. I also think businesses have some responsibility. For example, the wage subsidy program is a good way to stay connected to your workers. I think it's a good time to invest in training of workers so that when demand comes back, you've got the capacity, you've got the people that are ready to take the opportunities that will be ahead.
Thank you.
One from the audience, Governor, they related a little bit probably to the last question. Given the amount of government spending required to mitigate the effect of the pandemic, do you think that Canadian governments will return to balanced budgets within 5 to 10 years? Or are those a relic of the past? And that's governments, plural.
Well, I'm going to leave it to the Minister of Finance or the Albertan Minister of Finance to provide financial and budgetary projections for Alberta and for Canada. Look, I do think, as I said, the emergency measures were needed. They are emergency measures. When they're no longer needed, it'll be time to phase them out. And with that, you'll see some decline in spending. There may be some need for some new targeted programs. As I indicated in my remarks, we are expecting this to be, it's going to be a long recovery. It's going to be protracted. The economy is going to be restructuring even as it's rebounding. So there may be some need for some other programs, but you could certainly expect to see a lower spending profile than we've seen in the depths of the pandemic. So I do expect it'll be moving in that direction. I'm not going to give you I'm not going to put it on a calendar, though.
Appreciate that perspective, Governor.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Governor, another question from the audience, and it's an industry close to my heart. It's the industry I've made most of my career on, real estate. It's been on a tear during the pandemic, mainly thanks to low borrowing costs. But how worried are you about Canada's housing market?
Well, as you mentioned, well, first of all, real estate is a big market, and even the housing market is not one market. You've got the market for single-family homes, you've got the market for condos, you've got the market for apartments, and what we're seeing as a result of this pandemic is a real fundamental shift in people's preferences, what people want. You're seeing, look, the reality is we're all spending a lot more time at home. Many of us are working at home, and we want more space. And at the same time, people don't need to commute to work, and many people expect that their employers probably will be more flexible on a permanent basis about the need to commute to work. And so people are you're seeing rising demand for single-family homes, particularly outside of downtown cores. As you've indicated, that's being reflected in a lot of strength in the housing market and increasing housing prices for single-family homes. On the other hand, the condo market, particularly in our biggest cities like Toronto, is weak. Rents in our biggest cities are down. So, this pandemic is having quite different effects on different parts of the market. With respect to the housing market, what we get worried about is when we start to see extrapolative expectations, when we start to see, people expecting the kind of unsustainable price increases we've seen recently go on indefinitely, and they're basing their decisions on those kinds of assumptions. So when we see extrapolative expectations, when we see people starting to buy houses solely because they think the prices are going to go up, that is a warning sign for us. We are starting to see some early signs of excess exuberance, but we're a long way from where we were, say, in 2016, 2017, when things were really hot. And the other thing I would emphasize is that quite a lot has changed since then. Both federal and provincial governments have put in place new measures. I think federally, the B20 mortgage stress test has been very useful. Having said that, as I indicated, we're expecting the economy to strengthen going forward. We think there will be a need for considerable monetary policy support to generate a complete recovery. And in that low for long world, there are risks that housing could get carried away. So that is something we will be looking at very carefully, and we certainly will be updating through our financial hub, our monetary policy report, our financial system review.
And as you say, it certainly varies across our country, right? Our markets in Edmonton and Calgary are certainly nothing like Toronto or Vancouver. So it requires a lot of good, solid decision and policy making to ensure that we've maintained some balance and some equity across the system.
Yeah, Alberta housing markets have not been as strong, but we are certainly seeing some pickup there as well. On the other hand, some other parts of the market, commercial real estate, particularly in Calgary, is quite weak, and with some restructuring going on in the oil industry, that's probably going to take some time to work off.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Governor.
Final question, sir, is it relates to your comments, I think, regarding labor market scarring and opportunities for all Canadians as we emerge. What is being done, or what can be done, ideas, things that can be done for Canadians who don't share the bank's vision in a digital future, or not feel at home, at least participating in the digital future or the knowledge economy? What message could we bring of hope, perhaps, for those Canadians?
Well, look, I think there are many types of jobs. We're going to need many types of skills. we do think that these forces of digitalization and automation, they were here pre-COVID. COVID has accelerated them. And people should reflect on where their interests lie, and if they are interested in more digital skills, take advantage of the opportunities. If that's not what they're interested, look for areas where they have skills or can develop skills that are needed in the labor market. I think from a corporate point of view, I do think companies have a bigger responsibility than they have in the past to train workers and help workers who don't have the skills they need but are interested in getting them, get the skills. That's good for your business. You're developing, loyal employees who have the skills that you need to succeed. And one of the things that's really changed in terms of training is that traditionally it was done in a classroom. You had to, often fly people to locations. Now you can do that virtually. You can create modules. You can create learning opportunities for people across your company at relatively low cost and reach across locations in a much easier way. So, there's no single answer here. But certainly, get back to my message. A complete recovery is a shared recovery, and the Bank of Canada will do its part, and I'm hoping everybody else will do their part. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on that, I think it's quite a upbeat message of hope and kind of the need for bringing Canadians together for a common purpose. Brings us to the end of our time today. So thank you, everyone, for your great questions and engagement. And a sincere thank you to you, Governor Macklem, for speaking with us today, and to Janet for being a great partner, co-host. We love collaborating with the Edmonton Chamber. Both our chambers work well together. And thank you once again to our presenting sponsor, CPA Alberta, and our supporting sponsors, Alberta Blue Cross, Dynalife Medical Labs, and TD. We simply could not host these events without your support. Before we let you go, I'd like to remind you of two upcoming events from each of our chambers. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., the Calgary Chamber will be hosting a keynote and panel event focused on the future of the energy industry and how technology is driving and impacting it, right apropos to the governor's comments today. The keynote will be delivered by Robert Johnson, Managing Director and Executive Advisor at Eurasia Group. And on February 26th, the Edmonton and Calgary Chambers will each be hosting the Honorable Travis Taves, President of Alberta Treasury Board and Alberta's Minister of Finance, for a conversation on the soon-to-be-released provincial budget. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please stay safe and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Governor. Thanks, Murray. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Janet, Murray, and Rachel, and to everybody at the Calgary and Edmonton Chambers. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.